All right, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and as I mentioned in class, I've been having some problems with taping. I don't know if it's me or if it's Camtasia, but I've decided to go back and retape my Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 lectures. So Chapter 1 from our textbook, all right, HTML5 and CSS3, 4th edition by Muroc. As it says here, it introduces you to the concepts and terms that you need to work with HTML and CSS. So we find out how web components or web applications work, an introduction to HTML and CSS, tools for web development, how to view deployed web pages, and 5 critical web development issues. Now, one thing to realize, and I think I mentioned this in class when I gave the lecture the first time, and that is this is kind of a typical first paragraph for a textbook. And what I mean is the author tries to go over just about everything that will be in the book. So if some of the stuff that we go through in here doesn't totally make sense, I wouldn't let that worry you at all. All right. The World Wide Web, WWW, consists of many components that bring together a web page on your desktop over the internet. One thing, you know, when you say www, if I want to go to Rankin, it's www.rankin.edu, right? Boom, it gets me to Rankin's website. All right. The other thing to realize about www is that not only does it stand for World Wide Web, but there's the W3C, which is the World Wide Web Consortium. And if I go to W3schools.com, and it didn't like that. Try it again. W3schools.com. Well, it still doesn't like it because I put school instead of schools. All right, there we go. That brings us to the W3schools site. And if I go over to tutorials here, notice we've got HTML tutorials, we've got CSS tutorials, we've got Bootstrap 3 and 4 tutorials, JavaScript tutorials, jQuery tutorials, virtually anything and everything that this class is about. So the long version of this URL is right here. Whoops. All you need to really put in is W3schools.com, but if you put the whole thing in, that's what you get right here. All right, let's get to it then. Now, this is an example here of the components in a web application. The biggest change over the years is a few versions ago of this book, you would have seen here desktop computer, desktop computer, desktop computer, the internet, and a web server. Notice how it's changed over time. Collectively, more people now access the internet using tablets and smartphones than they do using desktops and laptops. And that number is probably only going to get bigger over time. So this is what makes up a web app. Not only that, you see that the internet here looks kind of like a cloud. It's kind of what the cloud is. All right? I mean, if I go out and I type in, what is the cloud? Too embarrassed to ask, what is the cloud and how does it work? The cloud refers to software and services that run on the internet instead of locally on your computer. Most cloud services can be accessed through your web browser, and some companies offer dedicated mobile apps. So, some examples of cloud services: Google Drive, which we use here, Netflix, Yahoo, Dropbox. All right, so there's a lot of different examples. The advantage of the cloud is that you can access your information on any device that has an internet connection. All right, I'm just going to bop back and forth between these two pages. So they talk here about networks, clients, servers, ISPs. So let's just jump back into that. So these are the components of a web application. The desktop computer, the tablet, the smartphone, those are referred to as clients. That's where you key in your URL. Or if you've got a touch machine, touch. All right. What happens then is that what's called an HTTP or Hypertext Transfer Protocol request is sent off to a web server someplace. That web server may be able to handle the request by itself, or that web server may have to call other web servers in order to handle the request. But eventually, it sends its information back to the different clients. So that's the server, these are the clients, but it sends the information back to the clients using an HTTP or Hypertext Transfer Protocol response. All right. Really ugly picture of the internet. The internet is a series of local area networks, or LANs, where a LAN means the machines are either housed in the same room or the same building where there can be a physical location. Typically, these LANs are connected to WANs, which are wide area networks. I always tell people, when I talk about the way that it is here at Rankin, if you don't understand a LAN and a WAN, I'm in the classroom right now. I'm in room T203. And I'm looking out, and there are a bunch of machines here, 24, actually about 27 in this room, that are all physically connected. And they're all connected to the same network. On the other hand, our campus here in Wentzville, Missouri, is about 40 miles west of the St. Louis campus. So there is no physical connection between our campus and St. Louis. Rather, we've got a wide area network where there is a non-physical, but there is a connection between the two. Now, the internet is actually a lot more than this. In fact, if I go out to Google and I go out to Google Images and I type in here the internet, I know there's a lot of pictures. I think this was the one I liked looking at. All right, where it's showing everything. And really what the internet has done, for lack of better words, is it's allowed people to go and communicate all over the world. So, well, we have phones that can do that. Yeah, but it's a lot more than that. I mean, when you think about it now, when you've got people who move away from significant others or other people, now when you've got things, for example, like FaceTime, etc., not only can they use voices to communicate, they can actually use images. So, the web app consists of clients, a web server, and a network. The clients use a web browser to request web pages. Again, that's that HTTP request. The web server returns the pages requested to the browser. That's that HTTP response. A LAN or local area network directly connects computers. Often it's referred to as an intranet. A wide area network are two or more LANs connected by routers. Again, an example would be the local area network at the St. Louis campus and the local area network at the Wentzville campus. The internet consists of many WANs connected through internet exchange points, or IXPs. An ISP, or internet service provider, owns the WAN and leases it or access of it to its network. All right, if you say, well, I don't totally get that, not a problem. With a static web page, it's one that basically ends with .html. Back in the olden days, like maybe 10 years ago or whatever, there were a lot of places, there were literally a lot of places that what they liked to do was they had a trifold piece of paper that was kind of their marketing ploy. And when they went on the internet, all they did was they took that trifold and they basically put it online. So it was static. It very rarely, if ever, changed. And in order to actually change it, you had to take the website down, make the changes, and bring the website back up again. That's more or less a static web page. Typically, there's only a single web server involved. Now, whether it's static or whether it's dynamic, there's still the HTTP request. There's still the HTTP response. HTML, which is the hallmark of this class, hypertext markup language, that's used to mark up web pages. It creates the web page content. All right, a static web page as it says, has a .htm or a .html extension. When the user requests a static web page, the browser sends the HTTP request to the web server. Sounds familiar because I just said it. When the web server receives a request, it retrieves the HTML and sends it back as part of the HTTP response. When the browser receives the HTTP response, it renders the HTML. It's kind of what it's all about. With a dynamic web page, on the other hand, it's where you can literally have interaction. Now, this is an example, but we've all gone out to websites, I believe, at one time or another, where at the bottom of the web page, it'll have like a hit counter that says like you are the 6,023rd person to visit this website. You go out there a few days later, it might say you're the 62nd person to visit this website. Now, often those are done using more than just HTML. All right. So a dynamic web page, as mentioned right there, it's generated by a server-side programmer script. Often it's a .aspx page for ASP.NET, a .jsp or Java server page for Java, a .php page if it's PHP. When a web server receives a request for a dynamic web page, it looks at the extension to find what kind of server the main server should call to process the request. For example, it might have to call a database server. All right. That server, when it finishes processing data, will send it back to the regular web server, which will send it back to the browser, which will render it as HTML. All right. Now, as far as these are your major web browsers in play today. Chrome, Firefox, IE, Edge, Safari, and Opera. Now, a couple things about them. First of all, Chrome, to me, is the browser everyone should be using. All right, it's Google Chrome. It typically has the best support for HTML5, the latest version of HTML, and CSS3 features. Firefox, nothing wrong with it. Internet Explorer, well, that's all versions prior to Windows 10, and it's old. There have been historically some problems with IE. Edge is kind of the new Internet Explorer, much better, I think, than IE is. Safari is, if you've got a Mac, you get Safari as your browser by default. All right. Opera in the past was just a textual system. I believe it'll handle a lot more than that now, but I'm not concerned with that. Again, this is my humble opinion. For whatever it is or is not worth, you should be using Chrome in this class. As far as server-side languages, hey, you learn C# in here next semester. The following semester, you do ASP.NET. The semester after that, you do Java. People say, well, what about the rest of these languages? You take 4 courses here at Rankin Technical College. There's just not enough time to give you all of these languages. As mentioned here on the bottom of the page, when you develop a website for general use, you need to test it on all browsers. Not only that, all versions of browsers, even older versions, to see how it looks. As it says, scripting languages, which are a lot of these, are designed to run on specific web servers. The 2 most popular are Microsoft IIS, Internet Information Services, and Apache. So JavaScript, how does that fit into this? Well, I have shown people in class this picture, and it's not a great picture. It's not mine. But if you looked at a 3-legged stool right here, let's grab this one. All right? And if you looked at it, the idea is if you want to sit on it, first of all, you may or may not work anyway. But if that's HTML and that's CSS and that's JavaScript, they all play a part. They all help to stabilize the stool. If you do this and you remove one of them, all right, typically you're not going to be able to sit on it and it may not even be able to stand. So why am I saying that? Who cares? Well, what JavaScript brings to the system is interactivity. They give an example here, and you probably have all seen this. If I take my mouse and roll it over the shirt at Land's End. In fact, let's try to go out to Land's End Outlet and see what happens if we do that. Okay, I'm not buying anything, but that's fine. Let's see, do we have anything here? Shop towels, all right. Can you see what's happening when I'm putting my mouse over this? All right, I'm doing an image rollover, and what's there is changing. That's the interactivity, or an example of the interactivity. So 3 examples of JavaScript. It can be used for data validation. You'll learn how to do that in this class. Image swaps and rollovers. You'll learn how to do that in this class. Slideshows. You'll learn how to do that in this class. Now, it says here JavaScript is a client-side scripting language. I'm not going to disagree with that. But today, more and more, JavaScript can also be used not just on the client side, but on the server side. When something is used on the client side like that, it's typically referred to as using it on the front end. When it's used on the server side, it's typically referred to as using it on the back end. And today, JavaScript can be used both on the front end and on the back end. All right, so let's have our quick little intro into HTML. All right, this is an HTML doctype statement. And let's go out here. This is where I just was. And I'm going to put in a pre-HTML5 doctype statement. I don't know if this will find anything or not. But it used to, this is what we type in now. All right. And it used to be, let's see, that you had to type in something that looked like this, or this, or this. Back in the olden days, like in the 90s, maybe the early 2000s, the idea was HTML was kind of went out of vogue. Many people thought it should be replaced. Languages popped up such as XML, the extensible markup language, XHTML, which was kind of a cross, or was supposed to be a transition between HTML and XML and other languages. But if you wanted to be able to use some of the functionality and not use other stuff, you had a big doctype statement that you put in there. Strict meant that you could not use tags that have been what are called deprecated. Transitional meant you could use them. And frame set allowed you to not use transitional tags except for frame tags. But over time, what happened was HTML became back in vogue. HTML5 was the newest version, and they decided to say, hey, let's just make this doctype simple. This word doctype can be put in uppercase, lowercase, or mixed case. So you're aware of that. This is your beginning HTML tag. There's your ending HTML tag. The name of the tag is HTML. It has an attribute named LAN. I have an attribute. I've got a height. I've got a weight. I've got an eye color. I don't have much hair left, but I have a hair color, etc. Here our HTML attribute is what language we're using, and we're telling it we're using English. So this starts the HTML document. This ends it. This starts our head section, ends our head section. The head section is everything that does not directly appear on the web page. First, we've got what's called a meta tag, which says the character set that we're using is UTF-8, which means basically we're using Unicode. Don't worry about it. We talked about it in class as well. This says the title is JavaScript and jQuery book. That means that what appears up here in this tab should be JavaScript and jQuery book. Now I'm going to grab all of this, and I'm going to copy. Whoops, I thought it would let me copy it. It's not. Let's see. I think that may have copied it. Hopefully it did. And I'm going to go grab it, and I'm going to come out here, and I'm going to just put it right here. And it did not take it. Doggone it. Edit this code, reload. Page source, not good. URL, some options. Well, what I'm trying to get across to you is this. I don't know if it took that, but let's see now. Oh, well, it did, but not what I wanted. If I put in this HTML, I get this. If we look at what's on here, the H1 tag, JavaScript and jQuery 3rd edition, that's this. This is a header 1 tag, an H1 tag. There are 6 of them. As the numbers get bigger, H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, H6, as the numbers get bigger, the text itself actually gets smaller. This puts the image on the page. That's it right here. So it assumes that this image is called JavaScript_jQuery.jpg. If we can't find it, it's going to show the words JavaScript and jQuery book. Or if someone has got a browser for the blind, for example, that's what they're going to see. This is a paragraph tag. This is a paragraph tag. You'll notice that all the stuff that does appear on the web page is within body tags. All right, it was very quick, but hopefully that helped a little. Again, HTML is used to define the structure and content on a web page. CSS is cascading style sheets. That's what allows you to accent the presentation on a web page. You have to bring a CSS file in, so you put that line of code or something like it that you see right there in blue up in your head section. I want to link a file to my web page. The relationship is, or the type of file is, it's a style sheet, and it's called book.css. What this file says is, this web page should use Arial font if it's available. If it's not, it should try to use Helvetica. If that's not available, it should use sans serif. It should use 100% of the assigned font size. The width of my page should be 560 pixels. This says to center the content on the page. This says to add basically 16 pixels of padding. And around this, we should have a 1 pixel solid navy border. This says our H1 tag should have no margin, 4 pixels of padding, a font size of 200% or double its regular size, and it should be in navy. This says our image should automatically float to the left, have zero top margin, 1M or 16 pixels of right margin, all right, 1M, that really shouldn't be a blank space there, or 16 pixels of bottom margin, and 1M or 16 pixels of left margin. Each paragraph should have no margin except for a bottom margin of 0.5 M or 8 pixels. So that literally what that does is it takes this that we saw that doesn't look very well formatted, and it turns it into, this, which looks a little classier. So CSS is mentioned there, is used to control how web pages are displayed. It allows you to specify fonts, colors, borders, spacing, and layout of pages. Okay? I'm not going to go over the history. I did a little bit already. HTML5 and 5.1 are the latest and greatest. All right. Tools that you can use for web development, there are several. This book has you use brackets, which is just fine. You can go out to brackets.io and download that. We're using Atom. And again, you can go to atom.io to do that. So they show you what it looks like in brackets. You can also use IDEs, Integrated Development Environments, things like Visual Studio, Eclipse, and there's other ones. As it says, they go beyond regular text editing and they provide a lot more. Some are free, some are not free. When you want to deploy or publish a website on the internet, you use what's called a File Transfer Protocol, or FTP program, to copy your information from your individual machine out to a web server. All right, a popular one to use for this is Filezilla. It's free, and it looks something like this. In fact, this is Filezilla. Kind of splits your screen in two, and on the left side is everything that you see on your local machine. Once you've logged in, on the right side is everything that's on the server. So if I wanted to take this MCC and put it over here, I could literally just grab the folder and drag it over, and boom, it would be over there. So again, Filezilla is the program we're going to use in this class to deploy eventually our electronic portfolios out onto the Rankin web server so they can be looked at out on the internet. All right? All right. Here's an example of a URL, or a Uniform Resource Locator. http:// that's the protocol. Normally you'll see one of three protocols. http:// where HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol, or HTTPS:// which is Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure Socket Layer, or FTP:// which is File Transfer Protocol. Then you've got the name of the domain, possibly a path, and possibly a file name. If you omit the protocol, it defaults to HTTP. If you omit the file name, it typically defaults to index.html. How to view the source code for a page. If I go out here, and I'm just going to go, here's the W3schools page. If I want to see the HTML that makes up this page, I can right mouse click and choose View Page Source. And there it is. Now there's a lot in there, and it's pretty ugly, but I can blow that up a little so you can see it. But notice Doctype, HTML tag, head tag, title tag, character set. So a lot of these you've already seen. Bringing in a different style sheet. Now this is bringing in here at the beginning of this script tag, and then it ends someplace down here. That's bringing in JavaScript. So I just showed you that. 5 critical web development issues as we finish up Chapter 1. The first is users and usability. What web users want. I 100% agree with what the author has here. They want to get in and get out. They want to find what they're looking for as quickly and easily as possible. They want whatever they have to do to get the information they want to be able to do that as quickly and as easily as possible. In an ideal world, websites are to abide by the 3-click rule, which says in 3 clicks the user should be able to get anywhere on a web page they want. Does that always happen? No. But in an ideal world it would. How web users use a web page? They scan to find what they're looking for. If they can't find it, they leave. They often click on links and buttons. and they frequently use the back button. All right, guidelines for improving usability, rather. This present as much information as possible above the fold. The fold goes back to the days of a newspaper where you folded it in half, and on the top half you had your lead heading and your lead story. All right. Group related items together and limit the number of groups per page. Include a header. Use navigation conventions like a logo, etc. Usability, here's the key, refers to how easy it is to use a website. It is critical if your website is to be effective, meaning that people are going to come to it, and ideally come to it often. Cross-browser compatibility is how well does your website show in all browsers. All right, here they've rated browsers where a perfect score is 555. Notice again, Chrome is at the top, Internet Explorer is at the bottom. Guidelines for cross-browser compatibility. You want to test and test and test. That's the old joke. Testing is a three-part process. Step 1, you test. Step 2, you test. Step 3 is go back to step 1. All right? You can get emulators and other things to simulate older browsers if you want to do that, and it's not a bad idea. You never know what version of a browser someone's going to be using. As a web developer, you want your web pages to work on as many browsers as possible, also known as cross-browser compatibility. User accessibility, as it says, it refers to the qualities that make the website accessible to as many users as possible, especially users who are challenged. If someone is blind, you can have the most beautiful website in the world with great pictures, great colors, but it means nothing to them. So you have to make sure that they can get around on your site as well. You should be, have an understanding of the ADA, the American Disabilities Act, and some of this other stuff that's shown in here. Possible types of disabilities: visual, which we've already talked about; hearing; motor, where maybe they can't use a mouse; cognitive, there's all sorts of different things that can be applied to this. So as it says here, accessibility refers to the qualities that make a website accessible to users. We're supposed to shy away from using the word disabled today and say challenged users. As we go through this book, we'll be given guidelines to try to make this a possibility. Search engine optimization, typically referred to as SEO, is where you appear here. So I've given this example in class that if I decide, let's just go over to Google here, and if I decide that I want to open up my own sporting goods store, I might type in sporting goods stores right here. Sporting goods, there it is. And you'll notice what comes up first. Well, there's Dick's. There's a bunch of Dick's here. Wow, there's a bunch of them there. Well, if I'm going to create, there's Johnny Mac's. I never even heard of that. But if I want Jeffrey P's, P is my middle initial for Paul, search engine optimization would say I'm going to do whatever I can to get that up here. Why do I want it up at the top? Because people, when they go out to Google to check for something, they're typically going to click one of their first links, if not the first link that comes up. So search engine optimization says that if I use one of these search engines, and there are others, but if I use Google, which has probably got 80 to 90% of the market, Yahoo, which has got 5% maybe, and Bing, which maybe has got 10%. As it says, with SEO, the goal is to optimize the website so my pages rank as high as possible. And we'll be given guidelines to do that as we go on in the book here. Responsive web design, what that says, for lack of better words, is that my site is going to look the same regardless of the medium. So here's how it looks on a phone portrait, a phone landscape. Here's how it might look on a desktop. As it says, over half the world's population has a mobile phone. Over a third are using smartphones. 60% of internet access is done, I mentioned this to you before, on tablets or phones, those are referred to as your mobile devices. 80% of all smartphone users access retail content at least once a month. 40% choose a different one if their first one isn't mobile friendly. So as mentioned here, responsive web design refers to websites that are designed to adapt gracefully to screen size. We will use media queries, scalable images, and flexible layouts in this class to achieve responsive web design. In fact, one of the later chapters, I think it's chapter 8 in this text, is all on this. So that was it. In the next chapter, we learn how to enter, edit, test, and validate a web page. We'll talk about that in a minute, but you should understand what a client is. Basically, it equates to the web browser, what a server is. When you go out on your web browser, you type in an address, how that goes out to a server someplace. A local area network where the computers are near each other and typically are physically connected. Typically today known as an intranet, and a wide area network, or WAN, which uses routers to connect local area networks. We talked about HTTP request and HTTP response. We differentiated between a static web page that ends with .htm or .html and a dynamic web page that typically ends with .aspx, .php, or .jsp. We talked about how JavaScript brings the interactivity into a web page, how HTML defines the structure and content of the web page, and how CSS is used for formatting the web page, all right, pretty it up, whatever you want to call it. In the next chapter, I believe it is, they'll talk about brackets. We're using Atom in here. If you can use any editor you want, or if you want to use an IDE, you can do that. We talked a little bit about FTP, and again, just to show it to you, if I come in here and I type in Filezilla, there it is. So this is everything right now. I don't need that. This is everything that's in here that's on my desktop. If I log in, give my username, my password, and my port, which I think is 21, and I click Quick Connect, it'll show me what exists on the Rankin server. And I can take and drag stuff from one to the other. That's uploading it to the server or downloading it back to my local machine. We talked about URLs, for resource locator and what they are. We talked about how to right mouse click and choose view source. All right, and we ended the chapter with these 5 different critical issues for web development: usability, cross-browser compatibility, user accessibility, search engine optimization, more often known as SEO, and responsive web design. Now that's it for this first chapter here. In just a minute, when I come back, we will go through chapter 2, how to code, test, and validate a web page. And I'll be back with that shortly.